Okay, I'm going to officially get started, and I'm sure more people will join us. But my name's Louise Ward, and I'm the State Director for the Animal Justice Party. And I'd just like to start off with an acknowledgement. So I like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and acknowledge them as traditional custodians of the country that I'm speaking from today. I recognise their continuing connection to the lands and waters and thank them for protecting this coastline and its ecosystem since time immemorial. I pay my respects to elders past and present and also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are all joining us today. Wherever we are today, we are on land that was never ceded. So I'm really pleased to welcome you all to this special webinar about how to get 1080 banned in your community. This webinar came about because of two passionate people in the AJP, and that's Sarah and Donna, who you see on your screen now, who suggested that we should start a 1080 working group so that we could leverage off the success that Matt Stellino had in achieving a ban on 1080 in Campbelltown. And from that working group, we decided to hold this webinar. So a big thank you to Sarah and Donna for their passion, work, and their initiative. And also a big thank you to Alex, Vince, and of course, Matt Stellino for sharing their time and expertise with us all. There's obviously a great need for this webinar and many people who want a 1080 ban in their own communities with over 200 people registered to come along. So just a bit of quick housekeeping. I'm sorry if the chat's not working. I'll have a look at that, but please use the Q&A. Just as a question comes to mind, just pop it in the Q&A and we'll get to it at the end. I'm really happy to introduce Alex Vince as our first speaker. Alex is a campaign manager at Animal Liberation. Alex is a dedicated animal rights activist with a background in education and social science who believes that fighting for the rights of all animals and the abolition of all exploitation is a justice issue whose time has come. And on behalf of Animal Liberation, Alex co-founded and runs the Coalition of Australians Against 1080 Poison, which also provides ongoing support to families who have lost loved ones to 1080. Alex is going to talk about the history of 1080, its impacts on animals, people, and the environment, and do some important myth busting, I think, around 1080. And probably, Alex, I can't think of anybody that knows more about 1080 than you, and thank you so much. And I'll hand over to you now.
Thanks, Louise. So hi, everyone, and thank you all for being here with us tonight. For anyone that I haven't met, my name is Alex, and as Louise mentioned, I'm the campaign director at Animal Liberation and a co-founder of the Coalition Against 1080 Poison. Before we get started, I would like to begin by acknowledging the true owners and custodians of country on which we meet tonight. I speak from the land of the Darug people and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. This land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. All of the studies that I'll talk about or reference tonight, they're all available on our website. I'll pop a link in the comments, or there'll be a link later on anyway. But if you have any trouble finding them, just let me know and I'll help you in any way that I can. But because time is short, let's get started. What is 1080 poison? The question seems so clear. What is this chemical? What does it do? And why are we here tonight to talk about it? But at the same time, because it has such far-reaching consequences, it's difficult to know where to begin. Like many infamous things, 1080 poison goes by several names. Its correct chemical name is sodium monofluoroacetate, but it's more commonly known simply as 1080. And the name 1080 refers to the fact that it was the 1080th chemical trialed by scientists in World War II. It's white, odorless, and tasteless. This makes it especially dangerous because victims can ingest it without knowing. There is no known antidote, so it is a death sentence. It's listed in the most toxic category by the World Health Organization, and it's considered a chemical of national security concern by American authorities because it could potentially be used as a weapon of terror. Since 2001, 1080 has been documented in more than 3% of known chemical terror attacks. And 1080 is lethal to all warm-blooded animals, including us. It causes organ failure and death, and victims suffer for many hours, sometimes days, before they inevitably die. So these are some pretty grim and terrifying facts, but there are also factors that have led some people to make some pretty strong claims against it. This quote is taken from a paper presented at a conference on lethal control. It states that when 1080 was first used in the 1940s in America, it was hailed as a miracle and a wonder. But only a few decades later, it was denounced as one of the worst evils ever perpetrated by modern science. So how did we get here? How did Australia become one of the few countries in the world that still permits this poison past its borders? 1080 is used in every state and territory of Australia. It targets introduced and native species alike. It's commonly laid on the ground or dropped out of helicopters. And since it was first used, it's been implicated in many non-target deaths. And to give you a bit of an insight into just how dangerous this stuff is, this table shows the estimated number of animals who died in just 4 months in the early 1950s, not long after 1080 was first used. Nearly 500 sheep, over 100 kangaroos, and an unspecified large number of birds were found dead after a 1080 baiting program. So Australia's chemical addiction to 1080 poison is relatively recent. It all began in August 1950 when Tasmania's chief veterinary officer, a man by the name of Keith Meldrum, applied for permission to import it. At the time, they were explicitly aware of the danger both to people and to other animals. But because they wanted to kill as many animals, primarily rabbits, as possible, they saw the danger as an advantage. And fast forward a little over a year later, and 1080 is imported for the first time in our history. 2 pounds, less than a kilogram, arrived in Hobart in November 1951. Shortly after that, 20 rabbits were experimented on so authorities could determine their lethal dose, or LD50, which is a measurement referring to the amount required to kill 50% of tested animals. 3 months later, in February 1952, field trials started in Tasmania. Our early programs exclusively targeted rabbits, so they tested baits made of apples, carrots, jam, and even sugar. Later trials tested these against each other to determine which killed the most rabbits. And they didn't care about the consequences. They needed to kill as many rabbits as they could. So they invented mechanical carts that laid baits automatically. Some of these are still on display in museums today. And despite the fact that 90% of the baits were taken in the second trial, there were few reported deaths. So even though there were signs that 1080 wasn't the silver bullet that we're still told that it is today, the chief vet requested a quote for 100 pounds 3 months later. And a month after that request for a quote to import 100 pounds of 1080 poison was made, 200 pounds were ordered. But this plan was nixed by the next month by the Commonwealth Customs Office, who issued a permit for a fraction of that amount, for 15 pounds. And that arrived in February of the next year. Today, Australia uses 440 pounds or 200 kilograms of 1080 poison every single year. And there's a reason why so much more is used today. In the 1950s, it cost over $350 to import a single pound of 1080 poison to Australia. Today, it costs less than a cup of coffee, between 40 cents and $1 to bait an entire hectare of land with 1080 poison. So we use a lot more today than we did in the past. Here's how much was used in 2019 in New South Wales. Over 57,000 baits were dropped over nearly 5,000 kilometres, and that's a lot. But there was even more to come the following year, when nearly 9,000 kilometres were baited with nearly 200,000 baits. And that's an increase of over 200% from one year to the next. So we know that 1080 was first used to kill rabbits. Today, it's still used to kill rabbits, plus 7 other species. In total, there are 4 native and 4 introduced species that are targeted. So these are the 8 species directly targeted with 1080 poison: rabbits, dingoes, foxes, cats, possums, wallabies, and patamelons. And this is a basic map of where they are targeted. And the key takeaway here is that Tasmania is the only place where native marsupials are targeted with 1080. Dingoes, foxes, pigs, and rabbits are targeted in every other state and territory, while Queensland and Western Australia are the only states where it's currently legal to kill cats with 1080. So now we know who we are told is being killed when 1080 is used. Let's look at who dies as collateral damage during those programs. So non-target species are any species who are not explicit targets. So that means any species other than those that we just listed. And they can be native or domestic animals. And though there are many, many more, these are some of the species recent studies have shown are at risk when 1080 is used. So some of these, such as the antechinus, are endangered. Others, like the green catbird, are vulnerable. And that leads us to our first myth. This is that native species are somehow immune to the impacts of 1080 poison. It's one of the most prevalent myths that we hear, but it's not based on sound science. The genus of the plants this myth is based on is called Gastrolobium. They're a flowering producing plant that naturally produce the chemical used in 1080 baits. So scientists think they developed this as a resistance to herbivores who eat their leaves or their peas. So this myth implies that 1080 is also somehow natural, but it isn't. Saying so is like arguing that the baits are sprinkled with crushed up leaves or implanted with peas. The chemical used in baits is industrially manufactured by workers in hazmat suits. It's synthetic and it couldn't be further from natural. But the plants this myth is based on are typically only found in limited parts of Western Australia. And it's thought that over time, this exposure has led some species to develop a higher tolerance than some others. But the plants that are found in Northern Australia produce far lower concentrations, and the plants are almost entirely absent from Eastern Australia. So this means that animals in these areas didn't evolve in the presence of the plants that state governments often rely on when they claim that 1080 won't harm them. Today, we know that the regional variation in their evolutionary exposure to these plants has caused significant differences in their sensitivity to 1080 poison. Some species in Southern Australia are over 3 times more sensitive to 1080 than the same species are in Western Australia. And marsupial herbivores in Eastern Australia are over 100 times more sensitive than they are in Western Australia. And to make matters much worse, there is strong evidence that the target species do not actually take the baits. This goes against another myth that 1080 is target specific. One study found that of all baits dropped during a program, only 1 were taken by the target species, in this case, dingoes. The rest were taken by ants, birds, cats, lizards, even kangaroos. So when that data is extrapolated, this means that for every bait taken by a dingo, 84 were taken by non-target animals. And in another study, it found that 99% of all baits were taken by non-target species. A single native animal, the quokka, was responsible for taking nearly half of them, while the intended victims, foxes, ate only 1. So 1080 is simply not working. And when we remember that 1080 is lethal to all warm-blooded animals, from earthworms to wedge-tailed eagles, these statistics are terrifying to say the least. But it gets worse still. The victims of 1080 remain toxic after they die. This means that any other animal who scavenges their corpse is killed too. So this makes it a food chain killer because it continues killing long after the first victim dies. And despite this, it isn't even a legal requirement in most states, including New South Wales, to collect the toxic corpses after a baiting program ends. So now we have a basic understanding of what 1080 is, who is targeted with it, and who's killed as collateral damage. Let's look at what that actually means for its victims. Common symptoms of 1080 include anxiety, frenzied behavior, hypersensitivity, vomiting, uncontrollable urination or defecation, convulsions, fitting and seizures, hemorrhaging and bleeding, and difficulty breathing. Other symptoms that have been reported to the coalition by families who have lost loved ones to 1080 include howling, barking, running in circles, and leg paddling. Leg paddling happens when they're no longer able to stand, but they keep running while they're lying on the ground. All of these symptoms were reported by Major, Stormy, Charlie, and Doble's families. So of all species, dogs are the most susceptible to 1080 poison. This photo, which was taken from the Queensland government, shows just how little is needed to kill a dog with 1080 poison. In fact, less than 2 milligrams of 1080 is enough to kill a 30-kilogram dog. Yet more than 3 times this amount is used in baits to kill dingoes. But being keenly aware of the limited time that we've got, I'll jump forward and just talk about some methods that are used really quickly. The first is ground baiting. This is when baits are laid on the ground by hand or they're buried. These baits can remain lethal for several months afterwards. Aerial baiting is usually undertaken in remote areas that are inaccessible to vehicles. And the risk to non-target species during aerial baiting programs is significant because there is no practical way to control where the baits land when they're flung out of helicopters. And aerial baiting is common in New South Wales. In the aftermath of the Black Summer bushfires, the New South Wales government announced plans to drop 1 million baits over 60,000 kilometres of bushfire impacted areas. Some of these programs continued well into this year. A relatively recent technique is the use of canid pest ejectors, or CPEs. They're mechanical devices that are partially buried, leaving only a baited lure exposed that contains a capsule of 1080 poison. CPEs were modeled on American devices known as coyote getters, or M44s. And that little GIF there shows you how they work. It's basically a spring-loaded bolt gun that shoots the capsule of poison directly into the mouths of animals who try to remove the meat that's stuck on the top. In America, there has been at least one case of a child who was hospitalized, nearly died, after mistaking one of these devices for a water sprinkler. Finally, there are toxic Trojan baits. These are experimental programs that involve surgically inserting 1080 capsules into living animals. Examples include the Polaris project and recent experiments involving bilbies. Fortunately, I don't really have much time to go into those, but there's more info on our website if you're interested. Now we know how it's used and who it kills. Let's turn to the big question. Is 1080 humane? The short answer, which you may have already guessed, is no. It's not humane. It causes unspeakable and irreversible suffering. So to put that into perspective, here's an eyewitness account of what it's like to watch a fox die from 1080 poisoning. It was sent to the coalition with the subject, "This is something my husband will never forget." It goes on to say that he was driving and pulled over to see a fox standing on the side of a road. The fox was foaming blood and what looked to be bile out of their mouth. It was all over the ground in front of them. And like it does so many people who witness the torture that 1080 poison is, they will never forget the way the fox looked into their eyes. But it can take anywhere from 2 to 22 days for an animal to die after ingesting 1080. During this time, they endure prolonged suffering that vets have compared to being endlessly electrocuted. In 2007, an RSPCA scientist published this paper. It concluded, after looking at all of the evidence, unsurprisingly, that 1080 should not be considered a humane poison, and that there is an urgent need for research into alternatives. Now, I'm not going to talk about that because Sarah will be covering that a little bit later. But it is quite clear that 1080 is not humane, and in fact, it is an animal welfare crisis. So if there is ever anything that I can do or we can do to help you or your community, please feel free to reach out and get in touch. And if you want to check out the references on these slides, they're available via that link there. Thank you all so much for being here again.
Thanks, Alex. That was, it's horrifying, isn't it? I mean, I know this is like the $64 million question, but what, you know, it's cheap. It's claimed to be effective when we know it's not. But, you know, what is the reason that like, in your opinion, like what is the main reason that Australia continues to use 1080 when so many other countries around the world don't use it? I mean, I know that's a pretty tricky question.
I think it is the cheapness, because it is so cheap. I mean, 40 cents to bait an entire hectare, that's ridiculous. But it's also, you know, the fact that there are so many myths that are used to prop it up that are basically, you know, supporting it going forward, which is why nights like this are so important.
Yeah, it was so great that you covered the native animals, because that's one of the main myths around that, oh, but it doesn't impact native animals. So yeah, and thank you for sharing that and all of your references. It's so good to have that kind of quality of information. Thanks.
Thank you. I can share those slides as well if anyone's interested in having them for later.
Yeah, that would be great, because we'll send out the recording and we'll send out everybody's presentations as well.
Yep.
Donna, I might hand over to you now. Donna has been with the Animal Justice Party for quite a few years now. She's started off as our regional group leader for Sydney Southwest Group and played a pretty instrumental role in helping get Matt Stellino elected to council, and has since taken on a campaign role, so mainly working on 1080 and also Campbelltown's koalas. And I love the way Donna kind of sees an opportunity and kind of grabs hold of that and be like, well, we need to be able to get this information out to other councils. So she put together this amazing presentation and kind of 1080 campaign pack that she'll share with everybody now. Thanks, Donna.
Thanks, Louise, and thanks, Alex. That's it's hard to hear that sort of information you're sharing there, but I guess it needs to be out there. So appreciate your time coming on board today. So this pack has been put together to support people that need to know more, or who are going to be presenting to councils to try and get the ban through at a local government level. So we are slightly out of order because Matt will be coming on a bit later. So Matt will talk through how he got the motion passed at Campbelltown Council. But essentially, this is a toolkit for anyone else who will, take on part of this journey. So it's a working document. I think if we waited until it was finished, we'd probably never publish it. So I think we're at the point now where we will share it with people, make it available to people, maybe via the regional groups, Louise. But feel free, if there's anything that you think should be included, or you have questions about what's in this particular document, just drop your comments or questions into the chat and we can cover those off. And it's something we need to take away and do and add to the pack, we can certainly do that as well. So a lot of what's in here, I guess, is being covered by Alex. He obviously goes into, much more detail, but this is just really to get, people educated on 1080, the AJP's part in, trying to get those bans enforced. As we talked about earlier, Sarah will go through the alternatives, but it really is just that, a toolkit. So from an AJP perspective, at this point in time, the objective is to ban all use and sale of 1080 in New South Wales, and to support and promote, alternative measures. Now, what we've included here, so it is banned in the Blue Mountains and in Campbelltown as well. So what we've done as a reference point is included documents that we used in getting these things passed in these two council areas. So if anyone's preparing that for their own council area, it saves you reinventing the wheel, because obviously we've got a lot of this information here. And this is just a snapshot, but we could share, some of those documents in their original form as well. So the Blue Mountains, that was passed in February last year. And then, of course, in August this year, we had Matt present this at Campbelltown Council, and you can see there some of the media that we used once that was passed. But you can also see on the left-hand side there the wording that Matt put in place to present to Council as well. Now, these are just snapshots, not really that easy to read, but what we will add to this is the actual links to these, media articles. What we just wanted to show with this is, it has been reported on, there's information out there, is, just not Alex and his group and AJP reporting on this, there's lots of other stuff happening out there in media land, talking about the effects of 1080. Now, on this page here, we've actually included a video. So we have put, I guess, a warning on this because it is quite graphic. So it's not something that we would launch straight into the video without that warning, because it's not easy to watch, to be fair. But, in some cases, maybe people need to see the video to really understand the impacts. I think that certainly puts it, into perspective. But again, it does come with that warning. Okay, technology. Here we go. Just some more there. And you can see, so we've still got some stuff to add in here. It's what other things we can do, what sort of events we'll organise. But as I said, we're not going to get to that point where this document is probably ever finished, and we'll keep adding to it, but just make sure it's a resource that's readily available and current at the time anyone wishes to download it. So some FAQs. So, you know, whether it's people that you're talking to and trying to educate about 1080, whether, you know, you're standing before council, you know, presenting a case, whether you're talking to councillors one-on-one or during different meetings, there's lots of different questions that you may be asked. So we ran a similar, or not a similar campaign, we ran a campaign some time ago around banned fur. And what we did is we built each council that we contacted, as the councillors were asking us questions, we were building the FAQs, because obviously the more information a councillor is armed with, the more prepared they are when presenting, you know, to the wider group at a council meeting. So this is probably one of those ones for those of you on the call tonight. You may have your own questions and we may not have thought of them. So if you do, please drop them into the Q&A, and then we'll make sure that they're included you know, in the document. Now, I'm not going to go into this because obviously Alex has been through this in detail, but again, it's just some graphics and just some basic information about, you know, what 1080 is. And it just talks about, you can see here, and I guess this kind of puts it in perspective too, that 90% of 1080 is actually used in Australia and New Zealand, you know, been banned in many other countries, and it just goes to show, I guess, the significance here and how important it is to get this banned. And again, I think Alex touched on this, you know, it's deemed a potential chemical weapon as well. So quite a high level information here. So what it's used for, obviously graphics is always good because it draws people in as well, right? So, you know, rather than just having words on a page, we can show pictures, we can show videos, we can show case studies, we can show stories, and that makes it real to people that you're actually, you know, talking through this program. So again, just reinforcing some of the information that Alex shared a bit earlier as well. And again, and these were some case studies that were sent in to us as well. So as hard as it is to read or see some of these, again, I think it's, you know, what really sort of drives the messaging home to people as well. So you can have the high level, what it does, you know, how it works, who, you know, who's impacted. But I think when you start seeing, you know, pictures, and particularly, I guess, with companion animals, because, you know, often people can relate more to companion animals because most people have them. And, you know, that hits home for them as well. So, you know, Alex touched on myths as well. So based on what Alex has talked about tonight as well, we could probably expand some of the information that we've got in this document here. And then what we've included at the end here is just some reference points. So, you know, there's a number of organisations out there, including Alex, you know, where we can get additional information or advice from. So it's around having, I guess, that, you know, the basic level of information or education ourselves, but knowing that we have absolute experts in the field that we can draw on where we need to. So as this pack gets released to people, we'll have Matt talking through how he presented and got the notice passed at Campbelltown Council. You know, this document is something that can be used, and we did the very same thing with banned fur. And I actually sat down with a councillor and went through this, and this was a document she could then take with her, you know, to the other councillors in her group as well. So again, please drop any questions you may have, any feedback you have, because we will certainly take it all on board. So that's it in a nutshell. I guess it's probably a little bit quicker than I thought I was going to be, because, you know, Alex obviously had a very in-depth discussion and his was really informative. But we'll continue to build, as I said, and make this document readily available for people.
Thanks heaps, Donna. And have what council is your next kind of, I know you've got plans to start approaching other councils, so which is the next one that you think you'll go to?
The next one, from a Southwest Sydney perspective, will be, I think, Liverpool. So they were really open in terms of the Banned Fur campaign. So we've actually got, I guess, a touch point in there too. And there's also someone that we work with locally who has contacts within Liverpool Council too. So we found they're quite approachable and quite engaging. Camden also sits within, but being a bit more regional, that may be a bit more difficult. But, you know, just with the change of councillors recently, I think there's a couple of opportunities with some that are more animal friendly, you know, than others previously. So there's definitely a couple of opportunities straight up. But I think Liverpool, first and foremost, out here.
And would your top tip be for people in an area to do a little bit of research on each of the councillors, perhaps? Maybe like look at the minutes, see how they've voted on things, but review the local media and try and pick an animal friendly person to approach first?
Yeah, so obviously a lot of these things take, you know, they clog up timelines on, you know, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, but you can often get a lot of good information. You can see you know, what they're supporting or posts, you know, they're liking or commenting on, and that you can draw information out that way, because sometimes it's not so obvious in what they're posting themselves, but what you see them supporting. And just, you know, for example, with Camden, something came up a while ago on Facebook and one of the councillors had posted their support. So automatically you see, okay, well, there's, you know, they're publicly posting this, so that they're showing their support for an, you know, animal welfare issue. So it gives you that, you know, that tie in there, and I guess the foot in the door, really.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And we'll share the link to that presentation, and we'll also share some sample petitions and sample letters and things like that people can use. Thanks so much, Donna. Sarah, I'm gonna hand over to you. So Sarah is our Deputy Regional Group Leader on the Central Coast, and she's been really playing a pivotal role in getting the local group active and organising many protests for koalas, for kangaroos, against shark nets. And Sarah was the initial one that was very eager to get a 1080 working group set up. And I know you've done some work with the council and done a lot of research now on some alternatives. So I'll hand over to you, Sarah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for coming. I will just get my screen up. Yeah, so I've actually got a lot of information to go through, so I'm going to speak pretty quickly probably to go through it all. So basically what I want to cover is all the different, well, not all the alternatives, but some of the alternatives that are out there. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're ones that we support, but I just want to touch on a lot of them, because there might be something that either like a councillor might suggest to you, or, you know, you may have in conversation, and just so that we know, sort of have a little bit of an overview of everything that's out there, and yeah, just sort of have some ideas and get people thinking. So where's my next? Sorry, guys. Oh, it's going. Oh, we're just going to jump straight ahead to that. Sorry, guys. So basically what I was saying is that there's a few things that you need to consider, and that is what the main reasons for why your council wants to control foxes. So the main reasons are to do with wildlife protection, livestock protection, and they can claim that they're one of the main reasons for endangerment and extinction of some species, and they even claim that they're a threat to people and to domestic animals. So when we're sort of looking at alternatives, we need to sort of address those concerns when we're offering up like potential alternatives to the council. Basically there's I've put them into 4 different categories. So there's like lethal population control, which we obviously don't agree with, non-lethal population control, livestock or owned animal protection, and then wildlife protection. So I'm just going to kind of run through some of the ones that are out there. Hopefully this could work. Okay, so humane culling methods. Really, there are none. And we all know that there's no humane way to kill an animal that doesn't want to die. So AJP certainly doesn't condone the killing of any animals by any poison, and switching out the type of poison that's being used is certainly not a solution. And, you know, Alex mentioned, I think it was Alex, there's different types of poisons that are out there. There's strychnine, cyanide, pindome, warfarin. There's so many out there, and they're all absolutely awful. And yeah, so certainly we don't want to switch one for another. There is one that is currently being used around the place. I know that my council here on the Central Coast, they've been using this one. So it's carbon monoxide in dens. So basically what this involves is putting a canister of carbon monoxide down into the fox den, and it's going to kill any animal in there. So it's aimed at killing the kittens and the vixen that's in there. Basically what it does is it binds to hemoglobin. It basically results in like cell hypoxia, unconsciousness, and then death. If it was, I suppose, inhaled properly and done, you know, it could be quite a painless death, but obviously a lot of things can go wrong. So, you know, we definitely don't approve of that. But one of the big things is that, you know, the kittens need to be at least 4 weeks of age, because any kitten younger than 4 weeks of age, is actually resistant to the hypoxia and it won't kill them. And the same with the vixen. If they don't get enough of it, then they're not actually going to die, and it's just going to result in brain damage, which is obviously going to be a really painful and extended death. So something that needs to be considered. Another one of the common poisons that is used is and promoted as more humane is pap poison, which I'm not going to try to pronounce because it's way too long. But it is actually registered for use with foxes with a similar kind of, I suppose, symptoms as the carbon monoxide, where it leads to like cell hypoxia, unconsciousness, and death. And so, yeah, that's how they sort of get away with saying that it's humane. But much like the 1080, so it's not specific to foxes in any way. So any animal that ingests it is going to be affected by it. And so domestic animals and goannas are particularly susceptible. But it's also, you know, bandicoots, birds, mammals, pretty much anything that eats is going to die. And within about 60 minutes, they say that they're unconscious, and then it's going to lead to death. There is an antidote for this one, but it needs to be administered by a vet, and it's by IV injection. So unlikely that any animal is going to get that, and they're going to probably suffer in the meantime as well. So yeah, if somebody tries to suggest these as alternatives, they're certainly not a good option. System. Trapping is another one that is sort of like said to be humane, but it doesn't. They don't really go into the details of it. So there's two different types of traps. One, actually, when I was looking it up, something on the DPI website was a quote. It says, "All traps should be well concealed and well away from public gaze," which I thought that kind of just sums it up, because, you know, if they don't want the public eye to see it, then they obviously know that it's cruel. And yeah, there's two main types of traps. So one is the leg trap, which is pretty self-explanatory. People have probably seen those or images of those, where they actually get their leg caught in the trap. And so they're going to have an injury, they're going to be in pain. Who knows how long they're going to be left stranded there without access to food or water, and, you know, potentially being attacked by another predator. So they're absolutely awful. And then there's the cage traps. So cage traps themselves, I suppose, aren't that bad, but it's what happens to the animal after. So if the fox gets caught in the trap, similar to a cat trap or anything like that, but if they're trapping the fox, they're obviously going to want to euthanize it. And, you know, that's probably going to end up being shot. Now, shooting, that's another one. So people often think that shooting is more humane. I mean, that's what they do to a lot of animals in agriculture, and that's, you know, our society seems to think that is humane. Unfortunately, the animals don't often die immediately, especially in, you know, with wildlife. They're, you know, the shooter may miss the shot and could get them anywhere in their body. They're going to run off injured, and they could die really slowly and painfully, you know, end up with infections. They've got, you know, foxes to have like really good family networks as well. There might be kittens inside the dens that are left without mothers, or, you know, the dads were out there trying to get food for them. So these are all things to consider when, you know, people, you know, try to tell you that's a kinder option, because they're not. What we really need to do is just get rid of 1080. So moving on to non-lethal population control, which is the ideal. And the two best ways to control population growth without actually killing any animals is, well, the first one would be surgical sterilization, and then chemical sterilization. And the aim of chemicals of sterilization is to just reduce the population growth. So it's not going to reduce the current population numbers. But like as the older generations die out, just of natural, unnatural causes, whatever happens, they're not going to be replaced by babies and stuff. So it's going to, like, over time, it will reduce population size. And foxes, I think it's like 5 years is their lifespan. So it's not going to take too long before we actually would see a difference. Surgical sterilization really isn't an option. Like, I mean, it's way too involved, way too costly. But chemical sterilization by means of immunocontraception is probably something that, you know, would be, well, it is something that would be great. It's nothing that is currently registered for use in Australia on foxes, but there is something that I've been found on all my research, and that is called Gonacon. So there's a bit more information here on that. So Gonacon is basically a vaccination that works on the gonadotropin releasing hormone. Basically, it will render both male and female vaccinated animals sterile. So it has found to be more effective in females, so 2 to 3 times more effective in males than females, or last 2 to 3 times longer, I should say. They don't know exactly how long it will last in the red fox because it hasn't been used enough. So whether or not one vaccination would be enough to deem them sterile for their entire fertile period, or if it would just, you know, they would need a repeat vaccination booster like every year or every second year or something like that. But, you know, it's definitely effective in dogs. It's also effective in a whole lot of other species that they found. It's already been used in the United States with deer. It's been used since 2009, really effectively for population control over there. They currently administer it via an IM injection, so they're able to restrain the animal to give the injection, but it's definitely possible that you can administer the vaccination via dart, which is what we would need to do with foxes, because it's not, I don't think it's really an option to sort of catch them all and restrain them all and give the vaccination at this point. The other thing on Gonacon is they have actually been trialing it down in Canberra as a means to control kangaroos, which we won't sort of talk about. It's another issue, but that kind of says to me that, you know, it is possible to get this vaccination into Australia. And it is a possibility that we could be using this in future for foxes and for other species if we chose to. It hasn't been registered for macropods just yet, but the application is in, and they said they don't anticipate any issues with that. So once they kind of get the green light, then I feel like that's kind of sort of a, you know, I suppose the door opening for using it for other species. So that's that's Gonacon. Really, there's, you know, I mean, it's overall it's pretty harmless. Obviously, it does, you know, make them sterile, but that there's no real other side effects that they've noticed. Maybe some localized bruising and that sort of stuff, but nothing significant. I've just gone in there to things like cost, efficiency, and availability as well, but I won't really discuss that. But if everybody sort of looks at the notes, because they're things that your council is going to actually care about. So the other thing that one of the other reasons that the government and the councils claim to be the reasons why they're using 1080 is for the protection of livestock or owned animals. So as I was saying, they blame them for basically like predating on chickens, lambs, baby goats, that sort of stuff. So we can sort of, there's the one sort of theory of we actually have other ways to control the fox populations. And then the second part is, trying to find other ways to fix the problems that they're that they're concerned about. So protecting livestock or owned animals. One of the easiest ones, so guardian animals, like alpacas, donkeys, and dogs, they're pretty much instinctively protective of, any animals that they're put with. So, if you just have you had a herd of sheep, for instance, and you have an alpaca there, they just instinctively hang out with them. If there's a fox that comes in, they will try to sort of chase them down. Dogs will often bark, so they'll alert their owners and they'll chase them away as well. So that's a really humane option for private property owners. There's no environmental impact, no cost to the council, and there's heaps of animals, obviously, as we know, that that need homes, especially dogs. And so that's one thing that anyone can do for their own properties. The next one I'm talking about is fencing, and there's two different types of fencing that I'll touch on. So we've got, exclusion fencing, which, is definitely not recommended. So that would be, large fences. So to pretty much sort of enclose an area to protect them from any sort of other animals going in or out. The problem with those is that if there was any sort of danger, then they're not able to escape. So that's the problem with those. So we definitely don't want anyone putting those up. Sorry. Yeah, or so the other type of fencing is around your own sort of private property. And that would be to protect your own sort of chickens or, your animals that you have at home. And so they would, as long as you're sort of checking those regularly, they would be definitely a more humane option. But just need to be aware that small animals can often become entangled in low-hanging wires, especially the electric ones, and then they could become electrocuted or, they could be exposed. And obviously that's really horrible as well. So that's something that's, again, at the cost of the individual person, but it is a way of protecting those animals against the foxes if that's what people are concerned about. So the final section is on wildlife protection, and this is the big one. So I've just come up with a few different ideas, and it's definitely not all of them, and I'm sure everybody has their own ideas, but it's just some thoughts on how we can protect the wildlife other than killing the foxes. So the big one, the main one, is bush regeneration and habitat protection. Because as we all know, that it's humans and habitat loss that are the main reason for extinction. It's not foxes at all. So setting up wildlife protection zones that can't be destroyed with new developments, programs to clean out bush areas of invasive species that may be preventing our wildlife from eating their natural diet, cleaning out waterways from the plastics, that sort of thing that native wildlife potentially is ingesting, really dangerous for them. And also, things like removing the grassy weeds that will add fuel to bushfires. So if there was a bushfire, that it doesn't spark off so quickly and it gives the wildlife a chance to escape. So that's a big one. I'm sure you all have heaps more ideas on how to do that. Other small things like possum boxes and bird boxes, just to give animals some refuge and for somewhere to raise their young, because a lot of animals did lose their habitats in the bushfires. So that's something that everybody can do, and working with your local WIRES, ARC or wildlife charities. And just wildlife corridors, making sure that when there are new developments, making sure that, that the animals are taken in consideration so that they've got access to water holes and, areas of safety if there are bushfires or anything. And a few other little ones, just domestic animal desexing programs. It may seem very unrelated, but obviously they contribute as well to, to, I suppose, hunting wildlife. I know cats have a very bad rep.
We might have to. I'm just conscious of the time, Sarah.
Yeah.
I was just sorry. I know.
No, this is it.
Okay. No, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just kind of all of a sudden looked at the time and thinking like, oh, I better get Matt on. Yeah, but it's good to see that there's options, and they're just kind of creating the impression that there is no option. So thanks so much for doing all of that research, and we'll include like your notes in with Donna's pack as well. So because you're right, like as you mentioned, like councils do want to know what solutions are and how much they're going to cost and whether they've been trialed anywhere. So all of that information is really critical. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Matt. Yay, cool. I'll do a super quick introduction of you. So this is Matt Stellino, our very first councillor in the Animal Justice Party in New South Wales. And Matt is here to talk to us about his successful ban on 1080 in Campbelltown, how he achieved that, and share some tips and information. Thanks, Matt.
All right, thanks, Louise. Hello all, thanks for joining us. First, I'd like to start out as well by acknowledging the Dharawal people Campbelltown is a area of Aboriginal land that, like all the others, was never ceded. Dharawal people have had a connection here for a long time and did a fantastic job keeping it in good nick. Unfortunately, we haven't had the same level of custodianship and care, but hopefully we can start to set right some of the errors that we've made. So how I got the 1080 ban across in Campbelltown Council, the main thing that I think will differ from how I did it, and unfortunately how you'll have to do it, is the levels of access that I was able to use. For weeks and almost a month prior, I was able to approach councillors one at a time at other briefings and at dinners and sort of just corner them into a conversation, or if I was already in a conversation, steer it to motions that were going to be coming up and one that I was hoping to raise. And then from there, I would go in and I would start asking them a series of questions until I'd removed any possible objection that I thought they might be able to have for my motion. But I think the key thing to do in your area, as Donna mentioned, is find out who your councillor is that is going to be the most empathetic towards animals. Most of them on their own Facebook pages, or if they have an actual website, will, you know, list what their key priorities are. And if you really, really get stuck, every council has their councillors listed on their website and has their phone numbers. You could just ring one and say, hey, listen, I'm just a community member. I'd like to speak to whichever councillor you think would be the best person I could speak to regarding animal issues. Most of the animal people on councils have a reputation that is known by their fellow councillors, so they should be able to point you in the right direction. From there, once you've identified your key ally, the first thing you want to do is ask them to seek a report, finding out how much 1080 is used. So they can do this one of two ways. They can either stand up in chambers and call for a report on it, which puts it on the public record, or they can go and approach, either their general manager of that council or the mayor and ask them to sort of just get the information for them. I did the latter. I have a really good relationship with the mayor here in Campbelltown, so I was able to ask him to find out exactly how much of it we used in Campbelltown area. We did use some, it wasn't a lot. It was mainly on the very fringes of our LGA. So once that you find out, first of all, if you find out that none is being used, great, continue on, because it's easy to put a policy in place that something will not be used if it isn't already. The fact that we used very little, I think it was kind of just left over as a, well, shit, this is something we've always done, so we'll just keep throwing these baits out. It was, easier considering I don't think we used a lot of it. We also don't have a great deal of farmland in the area anymore. A lot of it has been turned into more urban dwellings. So once you get the report back from your allied councillor, the thing you want to start to play on is potential votes that are going to be lost over this issue if they fail to act. So one of the things that I did as well is I spoke to this Director of City Services, excuse me, who has animal care under his portfolio. In that, I was able to ask him directly how many reports had we received regarding complaints or reports/complaints regarding foxes. So armed with that information, I was able, in my conversations with other councillors, to say, in the past year, the animal care facility has received 2 calls about foxes. So really, we're putting the residents and their companion animals at risk, and votes as well. I tied it back to votes for them, for two people who decided to ring up about a fox. So a lot of community members really don't care if they see a fox. It brightens some of their days. So to be out there killing them, one, is going to lose you votes from some members of the community. So, but going out there and risking their dogs while you're trying to kill that fox is going to cost you votes from another sector of the community. Very, very few will want you to have a pro-killing policy. So once I'd phrased it like that, I was able to sort of start the conversation. What I did during my discussions with all of them is I asked them if they'd be willing to watch a video. I had obviously described only very mildly because I wanted the video to do the talking, that I thought 1080 was one of the most putrid things as humans we'd ever concocted. And when they say, oh, why? I say, well, it's very hard to describe. Let me just show you. Would you be okay with watching a video for 2 minutes? It is of a dog who has received the minimum lethal dose of 1080. That video is available on YouTube. So I was able to just pull it up on my phone and sit there with them and sort of watch their expressions as they watched that video. It obviously showed everything that Alex talked about, the leg running, the frothing, the howling, the barking, the confusion. And once the video had concluded, I just focused that conversation around domestic animals, because ultimately that's what the majority of the residents in your council area are going to have and have an attachment to. So the first thing I did when the video ended, the very first thing I did was I asked the councillor who was viewing the video to acknowledge the suffering that was present in the animal the dog in this case, the suffering present in the dog as a result of the 1080. So they could just tie that together. Even though it was evident, I wanted them to verbally tie it together. Once they had acknowledged the suffering, I knew obviously as well, through having spent 12 months with these people now, who of them have dogs. So for the 8 out of the 15, I was able to ask the question directly, what if this was your dog? How would you feel? If you were out walking on one of our glorious trails in Campbelltown and you took your eyes off your dog for even a moment and boom, picked up a bait, or your dog got out of the yard somehow and spent the night wandering through the bush, or a day or 2 or 3 days, it's going to get hungry. Oh, there's something I can eat. No, it's a 1080 bait. You find your dog a day or 2 later and you essentially find either their carcass or you find them in the final stages of that poisoning. How would you feel? Once I'd had them sort of really in that state of despair that I was looking to get them into, I asked them if they thought that any resident in the area should lose their dog in such a manner. Once I'd got a no, the confirmation answer that I was looking for, I asked them, would it matter then if that dog didn't have a human? So moved it now into wild animals. And once they said no, I started to build that line of questioning that I was looking for, which was, it doesn't matter what their ownership status is, it matters that they should not suffer like this as a result of this poison. So once I'd asked them, would you like your dog to die like this? Should any resident's dog die like this? Should an unowned dog die like this? The next question I asked them was, would it matter if this dog was a fox? Because ultimately they suffer the same way. And so if we focus the conversation on the suffering and the fact that it is wrong, then I was able to get a no commitment from that as well, which was really good. And then the final question that I threw in for them was, well, would you be proactive or would you seek to proactively kill native dingoes if we were fortunate enough to have any in our area? You know, sort of if there were some still existing that were unknown up in the back of the army base that borders our LGA, and they were wandering through our area one day, would you like to know that one of our failures to act caused some of our last dingo population to be killed? And once I got a no on that as well, that they would not seek to actively kill dingoes, then I knew that I could ask them my final question, which was, so it would be fair to say that 1080 has no place in our community. And once I'd got the yes, that they agreed to that, that was it. I said, great. I just wanted to let you know I am going to be raising a motion, which is going to call for Campbelltown Council to put a policy in place that this is no longer used. I then gave them background information that I'd spoke to the mayor. I'd got reports on how much of it we used, where we used it, and essentially what species we're trying to target. And there weren't, in fact, other than, it might help control fox populations, to which it was very easy to say, well, the army base there is huge. Really, any that we might be controlling are just going to if there's a void left by a poisoning from 1080, then the foxes from the base the following season are just going to fill that exact same space. So it's not going to be an effective means, and we are going to risk, residents' companion animals during that same window without any gain. So yeah, I gave them that background information, told them I was bringing it, told them I'd done all the research in the background. If they had any other questions between now and the time I brought it, feel free to ask me. And yeah, once I'd gone around and got the support I needed, I'd spoke personally with 13 out of the 15 councillors. The other 2 I didn't get a chance to speak to, but there's a contagion effect in chambers. When you see the votes going around the chamber of yes, 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 sometimes councillors will just vote yes on it. Either because they see you and they know that, okay, well, you're a knowledgeable person on this subject and you've built a reputation of trustworthiness or of level-headedness, which I feel I have in Campbelltown, then they'll vote yes on it. And sometimes they'll vote yes on it just to build political capital. So, other councillors that you might be looking to have pass this motion for you might have political capital that they're willing to leverage, even if someone might not agree with them or agree with that motion straight out. So that's they're my pointers. I hope they're helpful. If anyone has any, one other thing is when you are speaking with the councillors, the most important thing to understand is they're just regular people. Don't be afraid of them. Some of them are not that intelligent, I promise you. And the rest of them are just 9-to-5 workers that somehow found themselves there. But a key question you can ask them is, especially if they're a Liberal or Labor Party member, is will you take this to your caucus meeting? So if you've got a buy-in of them as an individual, say they're a Labor member who's a part of a majority Labor council, which actually the best thing you can probably do is target the animal councillor from whoever holds the majority. It will be far easier to get that motion up. If it's an independent and it's a hostile council of 10, that independent might not have the numbers they need. But if it's a council of 10 and Labor have 7 seats, find your best Labor councillor would be my advice. And same, if it's a Liberal councillor of 10 and Liberal have 7, find your best Liberal councillor. Don't think that just because the party they belong to, that as an individual, they won't be passionate about the issue. Once you've got their buy-in, ask if they will take it to caucus, which is their essentially party room meeting that they do before a council meeting, where they will have discussions about what are we going to do about this one and how are we going to vote on that one, and etc. They're not binding meetings. They can, on a personal basis, vote how they feel on a conscious level. But most of the time, if they're good party members, they'll follow the party line. So get them to, be willing to take it to their caucus and ask them to keep you in the loop on how it goes. That would be, the best thing you could do. And that's everything I have. But I'm happy to answer questions if time permits and if anyone has any. If not, I'll hand back over to Louise. Thank you.
That was amazing, Matt. I think, I don't know, the way that you do engage with your councillors, and obviously you use all your skills that you've developed over years of outreaching as well to, connect with them in a way. And that's really powerful and really great information. And especially, targeting the majority party at each council is great information. Donna, I think we'll write up some extra stuff into the pack based on,
Yeah, I've taken lots of notes.
Yeah. We might even use video of you in the pack, Matt.
I should have put my AJP shirt on.
We are slightly over time, but there's still quite a few people here that must not mind that it's over time. People are free to leave whenever they want. So maybe we will go through a couple of questions. Alex, I reckon this one's for you from your presentation. You mentioned that it impacts all warm-blooded animals, but then there was also the reptiles and the lizards killed by 1080, so it impacts lizards as well?
Yes, that was a quote. It should have been in quotation marks, but
okay.
We'll go back and change that. Yeah, from, as I said, earthworms to eagles, everything.
Yeah. Cool. Somebody's asking, this one might be for you, Matt. What kind of poison is in the rat poison container boxes that you see all over the city and you see in various places? Do they also kill second and third ingesters of the first animal?
I wouldn't be able to speak for every single box, but I would say that second generation anticoagulants have been, moved up to be the industry standard. They're generally cheaper. They're the most readily available. So, if they're the most readily available at Bunnings, that's because Bunnings sees that they're probably the most sought after item from both a consumer level and also from a trade level. Like Bunnings tries to target that retail and trade part of the market. So I would suggest that they're probably second generation ones. So they would more than likely, more than likely affect second and third victims on the food web.
Thank you. Catherine's in Hume Council in Vic, and they're going ahead with a 1080 meeting this Sunday talking about targeting rabbits. Yeah, so you're keen to get this information. I can send you this information tomorrow, Catherine, and maybe also send Donna's email and maybe Donna can answer any questions you've got. And Marguerite's put a message that she's been fighting against this for over 45 years. Thank you so much, Marguerite, for all the work that you've done. Yeah, we've got, okay. Because we've got one from Christine, because the baits last for some time and 1080 kills plants as well, is there also an argument against 1080 based on its impact on the environment? So Alex, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm not sure of anything to do with killing plants, though I'm sure it's likely. In terms of the environment, I think the argument can be easily made that killing dingoes or other animals in an ecosystem further disrupts an already broken ecosystem.
Yeah. A question about immunosterilization. So that was what Sarah was talking about with the Gonocon and the trial that's currently happening. And yeah, we're not sure why it's not more widely used. We wish it was. It's probably to do with cost and a whole range of things. Daryl's asking how we get a pack. We're going to email them out to you, Daryl. And the question about, should I wear my AJP t-shirt when I approach council? I think that's a good question. And I think it depends. I don't know if Matt, you want to take this. I think if you're going in there representing a regional group and you're going to be talking about how the regional group is going to be launching a campaign against 1080, then it could be good to wear your t-shirt. But if you're just wanting to go in as a concerned citizen to have a first engagement with a councillor and maybe not make it so political, I don't know. Matt, do you have a view on that?
I would say wear your AJP shirt. The reason I would say that is more and more as a party, we are becoming a brand. Councillors, state MPs, federal MPs, everyone is concerned about their vote, be it first preference, second preference, third preference. If they see that, oh, I'm not just doing a favor for you as an individual, but I'm potentially doing a favor for you as a party, and come next election time, you might run a candidate in the seat. And if you just miss your quota, you know what, you might remember that I was a really nice councillor and you'll funnel your votes through to me. I would definitely leverage the party in that way. You might not want to say that you're there and every word that you speak is on behalf of the party, but you can say that, you're there as a concerned member of the community and you're also there as a member of the Animal Justice Party. And, the whole reason we ran a candidate in Campbelltown is because the previous council and the previous mayor would not listen when Donna had her ban fur campaign. She got absolutely stonewalled. And so they went, okay, we need a seat here. And we got one. So, if George Brachicevich had listened and had just incorporated, there might not have been so much like fire in our bellies when that election came around. So yeah, sorry, the other thing, just while I've got the mic, I might add that something that Donna did during the Ban Fur campaign was to invite the councillor to a Zoom meeting, you know, because if we can, and it might be really worthwhile doing here, a pack might be a great initial point of contact. But if you get them to the point where they say, I've looked at the pack, but what a councillor will want to do before they go into caucus is to, you know, really learn the subject matter. So say, listen, the pack's one thing, but would you be willing to come along to a Zoom meeting? I'll organize it just for you. And on the other end of that call will be the head of our 1080, you know, perhaps our state convener. I'll jump on if you'd like. And you can say that, you know, the councillor that got it up in Campbelltown will be on, and they can bounce any questions they have off us and just treat it like a little training session for them to make them more confident in delivering it. Because if they're fighting for it on a, say, a 51 or 55% basis, it might be enough that the first objection they have falls it over. But if we can sort of push them up to it's something that they really want to champion, then, you know, they'll fight through those objections. So yeah, don't be afraid to invite them along to something, and we can likely organize it.
That's an amazing offer. I mean, how many councils are there in Australia? Do you want to attend meetings for that? I think that's a great offer to have.
If someone gets them to the point of they've read the pack and they're still ready to go,
yeah,
I'd say qualified candidate, and I'd be willing to invest the time.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, we might leave it there because we're a little bit over time. Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to everybody who's participated online. I really hope that this has given you the inspiration and some of the tools and information to get this happening in your local council. And we will send out an email with links to the presentation and contact details, and we would all be here to support you guys. And let's see just a rolling lot of bans across councils across Australia. And as soon as we get to, I mean, I know, Alex, you've been working on this because you get a critical number of councils, and then you are able to pressure the state government based on, well, there's constituents all over these local government areas that are actually going to be, you know, voting in the state election, and that would really be a great pressure point as well. So thanks everybody, and yeah, have a nice evening.
Thanks, so. Night.